So the next type of core debate I've identified are bans versus regulation debates. And I think this is very similar to choice versus imposition debate. It's just a question of should we ban a specific activity. But this video will focus more on the enforcement of that ban and whether or not people can make a choice rather than focusing on the choice itself. So sample motions. Quite simply, this house would ban smoking, ban boxing, ban American football, or whatever have you. I think the less intuitive version of these motions are when it's not the government necessarily doing it. So, for example, this house as a parent would not allow their child to use social media. A lot of the frameworks of thought for banning motions, looking at it from the government's perspective, I think would also apply if you were a parent instead. So the first thing I want to ask is this an act people should be able to opt into? And this is the section that's most likely linked with choice debates. Can you make this choice? Is it good for you? Etc. So again, do some cost-benefit analysis and ask. I think one big difference between a regular choice debate and a ban debate is that a ban will necessarily prevent all people from making that choice. So it's not just a question of should some people not be allowed to make that choice, but should all people not be allowed to make that choice. And I think a good example of this might be, say, this house regrets the rise of retail investment platforms. So things like Robinhood or eToro, where everyday citizens could invest or buy and sell stocks. And maybe statistics could show that people will on net lose money for that. I would raise a question opposing the banning of such platforms or regretting such platforms of we don't really care if people on net lose money because it's unclear to me why you should ban people who might be investing responsibly, people who might have financial know-how, people who are making money off of their investments. Why should you ban the activity for them just because other people might not be as responsible with the kinds of investments they're making? And obviously that's a very simplified way of looking at the issue. But I think that's something you could raise as a question of a ban affects everyone. Why not just ensure that a group of the population can do it and prevent all the maybe manipulative, deceptive advertising tactics that force other people to do it? So as in choice debates, can people choose to do it? But we're now going to focus more on does the ban work? Because I think just because there's something is banned doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be done anymore. And that's the main question I want to go through or explore in this video. So the first question is, do they have power over opposing institutions? Because if you are banning something that something else, some other body is allowing, is doing, there's a big question of will they be able to actually fight you back on that? So let's say the motion was the American football motion earlier. I don't think you'd have much trouble banning this, to be honest. Like I think sports authorities would likely not oppose the government, especially if there was like some kind of criminal penalty on this or whatever. However, banning drugs is very difficult because I think that cartels would be more than willing to oppose governments. And therefore, it's a question of will the authority that is banning be able to exercise their authority or power over the opposing group? And that's a question you might want to exercise. On Gov, you have to explain, yes, they have more power, they will be able to do it. On Op, you'd have to explain, no, they don't have enough power, the ban will not work. Second is monitoring, or just can you actually see who's doing the activity? So when things can be banned or be illegal, they're only effective insofar as you can catch people doing it. So let's say the motion is this house would ban cryptocurrency. There's a question of can a government actually catch everyone engaging in crypto? When obviously I don't think it's the majority, but there is a lot of crypto that is traded in the black market. There is a lot of difficulty identifying who is participating in crypto because there's no centralized authority and all the different stuff that makes crypto crypto. So especially with decentralized finance, it seems very difficult to actually observe and catch people who are engaging in this activity. So this monitoring is important because not only does that allow you to punish and prevent people from doing it again, it also means that you're able to deter people because they feel like they're being watched. So question of, is this an activity we can monitor effectively? On a banning side, you would have to explain, yes, we can. a side opposing the ban will say, no, we won't be able to do that. There's also the benefit of regulation that you'd want to see. So even if an activity might not be good, could it be better off when it's regulated? So maybe there's some things you don't like about the activity, but you minimize the worst excesses of those harms when you regulate it instead. So let's say the motion is this house to ban all drugs. Maybe you don't like drugs and all, that's your stance. But you think that if you have the government manage the distribution of drugs, it'll be a lot better. So in state-run facilities, um, maybe you can do a more informed consent. So maybe you'll have people informing people of the risks of taking certain drugs rather than just having them buy it from some random person. You can remove the presence of dangerous mix-ins or chemicals within drugs that are often used to make them way heavier so people will pay more. And you can often have doctors on standby in case of medical emergencies. And that would make the consumption of drugs a lot better and safer. On the other hand, you have a motion like this house would legalize trophy hunting. So maybe you could argue that regulation is better and allowing trophy hunting is better because you can use the money to protect a certain species rather than the alternative where these species could still be hunted and taken, but instead of government revenue, it'll instead go to poachers because these are like very oftentimes they're like more luxurious, maybe sometimes endangered species, very large species, etc. There's also the question of the willingness to participate. Basically asking, if you ban this, will people still do it? Would they still want to do it? And I think that really depends, right? Like, I think if you did something like ban American football, my take on it personally is that maybe at the start, people would still do it because it's still so ingrained within culture. But in 20, 30 years' time, I do think you'll see a noticeable decrease in the number of people playing it. Whereas, for example, drugs, alcohol, etc., when drugs have been banned for the longest time, but I don't think there's been a significant decrease in the number of people that are engaging in like illegal drugs. So there's a big question here of would allowing this take power away from nefarious actors? So for example, if we allow drugs, would we take power away from cartels because now people are going to us? Or if you're on the side that is banning, are you actually instead just rather if you allowed it, um, are you instead just introducing more people into the activity? So that's the question here. Are you taking away control or are you just overall increasing the number of people that are doing this? There's also a question of engagement with the state, or maybe broader society would be a better way to label this. So when something is banned or criminalized, people are much less willing to come forward on having participated in that activity, mostly because they fear legal repercussions that come with it. So for example, for the use of drugs, you're less likely to get medical treatment if you're afraid you get a positive drug test, your employer finds out, the authorities find out, etc. Maybe somehow. I'm not sure what medical confidentiality laws would exist for that. Or you might be less likely to report abuse or other criminal activity to the police. Because if you're going to rat out someone that is in the cartel, you'd also have to admit maybe you were pushing, maybe you were using, etc. Lastly, is that not just in terms of the legal ramifications, but also in terms of social factors and how crime is viewed. People might be less willing to go to friends or family because they're seen as criminals, especially with drugs. There's huge social stigma that make people judge people who use drugs and say that they are low lives, etc. And therefore, you further push people away from systems of support that they might have needed and that might have been the reason they were pushed to drugs to begin with. So those are the main things I think you should be considering in ban motions. Again, a ban doesn't mean immediately that it's going to not be allowed. And these are the different ways you could use, or like things should be running through your head as to whether or not the ban will be effective or if it will be ineffective.